Okay. Hello, hello. Good morning on the last week of the module. Um, First things first, what I'm going to ask is for Chris, you to submit the final campaign of the project on Wednesday, uh, by Wednesday. And that will be for the art direction and team projects project. So, the final pieces that we discussed for that. And again, I'm going to devote this session here, this class, to more of photography, photography and video. Actually, with video, what I was going to do is just make a separate video on, just for tips on how to use your DSLR as a video camera, rather than spending time in a lecture to do that. It just seems like, let me switch over here to me. It just seems that it would be a lot of, just I can do this in a video. I can basically go through the camera and talk about the settings, how to set up your camera to shoot video for certain situations. So more so than that, than talking about that, what I wanted to talk about today is a couple of more shots showing how to achieve a long exposure shot with your camera. And I'll show you some examples of when you would use long exposure. And then also to do a macro shot, which is a ultra close-up shot of something. And believe it or not, you can use your current lens to take a extreme close-up shot. And I'm going to show you how to do that, because your lens is really not designed to be a macro lens. Macro meaning, very close up. And there's only you can only get your lens so close to your subject with that standard lens that you guys have. To do proper macro shots, you would have to buy a macro lens, and macro lenses are very expensive. But we're talking about, those type of shots of flowers and bugs and water droplets on leaves and things like that. And, for some people, that's not really a big deal. A lot of people don't ever intend to do that kind of stuff. But if you do, some people really like it. And I kind of got a little bit involved in some macro shots, and it was enough for me to actually spend money and buy a macro lens. So I actually went out there and spent, a few $100s in buying a macro lens. And I don't really do it a lot. In fact, I rarely do it. But for some types of shots, like especially different products, like product photography or things like that, it doesn't necessarily have to be just bugs or, or plants and flowers and stuff. So let me switch over to the screen here. I'm going to switch over here and share my screen. And cancel that. Leave this screen here. I'm going to go over to my photo album here and just kind of show you an album of macro shots. And these are some photographs that I took when I was kind of all into macro photography. And basically, it's just very close-up shots of things. And most of what you'll see in macro photography are like insects and flowers and things like that. And it really opens up a whole new world of things. And I did a series on this called "And Now I See." In other words, these are things that you never really see in with the naked eye. But once you get a camera on it, you start really seeing some quite interesting things in nature. And so I found these things on the ground. This is just a bud, a flower pod with some buds in it. And I stuck it on my, table in the back, and I, took some extreme close-ups. That's a pine cone. Some of the cones of inside the pine cone. This is just a leaf that I found on the ground as I was walking the dog, and I picked it up, and it had this furry stuff on it, and thought that was kind of interesting. There's all kind of mushrooms that grow in the park, because they overwater the grass. And I've always just probably just stepped on this stuff and never thought of taking a photo of it. And all of a sudden, I brought my camera and I took this shot, and I started seeing all the striations underneath these wild mushrooms here. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Early in the morning, there was dew on the side of a tree, and I saw it, and it looks like strings, but up close, they're actually like beads of water. And this was a dandelion. We see these all the time in the grass, and I just put my camera on the ground, and I got as close to it as possible and shot the inside of it, and got this really nice shot. I really like this one, the way that one came out. That's not really a macro shot. That's more of a close-up shot. Again, and so that's just bark on a tree. But when you shoot real close, you get all these interesting colors and textures and things like that. It's a dead flower that, would have passed up, but took a picture of it, and I really like the way the color and the blur came out. Another seed pod. So you'll see macro photography used a lot with, this is just moss on a tree again. Almost looks like kind of broccoli or something. And okay, so that's a little thistle down by the senior center. Again, a close-up. All right, so that's pretty much it. Okay, so what I want to talk about is how to get a shot like this and what you have to do with your equipment that you have. I reach over and get my camera here. Again, the best way to do it is to actually get a macro lens. And hold on just a sec. Pull out a lens here. And Canon makes a bunch of them. But what you want to do is, and I don't know if you can see this, I'm going to hold this up to the camera here, but on this lens you could see how it says Canon macro lens. So it says it right here on the lens. And to get a true macro lens, it has to say that on your lens. Some lenses say macro capability, or it will say macro, but it's not a dedicated macro lens. And the difference between a macro lens and a regular lens is that there's always a minimum focusing distance that you can get with your lens. So if you're trying to focus really close on a subject and your lens just won't focus, chances are that your lens is exceeding the minimum focusing distance, which means that your lens is too close and it just won't focus any closer than a certain distance. Every lens is rated at a certain minimum focusing distance, and for most lenses, like the lens that you have, it might be about, I don't know, 7 inches, 6 or 7 inches, which means you can't get any closer than 6 or 7 inches to your subject. Otherwise, it just doesn't focus. A macro lens, though, is rated at inches. So a macro lens might be rated at, an inch and a half you can get. So you can get much closer to a subject with a macro lens, a dedicated macro lens. And it allows you obviously to take, closer, real close pictures. So that's one way to do it, is to get a dedicated macro lens. But, Canon's minimum macro lens is probably going to set you back about $350. So that's something that, unless you're really into it, you might not want to shell out for. But there is a way with the lens that you have to actually get a close-up shot. And I'll show you that in one sec. But let me just talk about some of the settings that you would have to set your camera up. Number one is you actually want deep depth of field when you're shooting close, because the closer you get the lens to the subject, and we talked about this in shallow depth of field. One of the ways to get shallow depth of field is to get your lens close to the subject. And when you get close to the subject, your background starts blurring out. Now, when you get an inch away from your subject, not only does your background blur out, but your subject, the depth of field gets razor thin, which means that, from the front of your lens, from the front of the object, this will be in focus, but inches back will start going out of focus. So if you're shooting like a bug, like a bee, you're just going to get the head of the bee in focus, and by the time you get just millimeters back in depth, it's going to go out of focus. So you want maximum depth of field when you shoot macro, which means you really want your lens to be, your aperture to be around 11 or even 16 when you shoot. Now, even at f16, the deepest depth of field, when you're that close to a subject, it's still going to be extremely shallow in terms of the blur. So if you shot at a wide aperture, a big aperture, like 3.5 or 5.6, then it's going to exaggerate that even more, and you're really not even going to see, or, it really doesn't define the subject that you're shooting, because the depth of field is just too shallow. So f11, f16 is a way to set up your camera for that. And then another thing is that the closer you get to a subject, the more camera shake is involved. When you zoom in, you can see how much a little bit of shake in your hands will do. So shooting macro shots handheld with your camera is almost impossible. Okay, it's really hard to shoot a macro shot. What you have to do, if you have to shoot handheld, okay, let's say you're out in nature and you're leaning down and you want to shoot a flower and you want to get real close and shoot a macro shot, and you have a macro lens attached to your camera, well, you can get close, but the problem is your handshake, just breathing is going to shake the camera so much that at that distance, that close from the subject, it's going to blur. So it's really hard to get a focus shot shooting macro. What you have to do is set your camera to high speed burst, where when you press the shutter down, it just bursts shots. And you're going to get up as close as you can to the subject, focus, and then you're just going to shoot a bunch of shots, like, 10, 15 shots of that subject. And then you're going to go through and find the one that might be in focus, because most of them will be out of focus. And a lot of times what people do is they kind of move in and out as they're bursting. They're going bang, 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 bang. And hopefully as they move in and out, one of those shots will be in focus. And that's the way you have to do it, handheld. So the way to do it really is to use a tripod. And that's almost the preferred way, almost the essential way that you have to do it. But a lot of times we don't have a tripod when we're out in nature. And another problem that we come into is what happens if the flower is moving in the wind. Okay, that's another problem. It's like you could be on a tripod and your camera could be locked down solid, rock steady, but you know, if the subject is moving, then you still get that blur. So it's tough. It's a tough shot to get, but it's definitely a possible shot. And macro photographers shoot just hundreds of photos in order to get that one that's in focus. So f16, f11, somewhere around in there, something deep depth of field, and keep your ISO. You know, you want as fast a shutter speed as you can possibly get to freeze that motion. So, you know, you need light. So when you're outside in the sun, usually you have plenty of light. But when you're indoors, you're going to have to light it with light. And you can use artificial light. You can use, a lamp or something. You don't have to use flash necessarily. But those are the things that you want to do. And you want to, if possible, be on a tripod. Lock down your camera so it doesn't move. You also want to put your camera on a timer mode. So like a 10-second timer or a 2-second timer. I know that you have both. A lot of times I use a 10-second timer, but if you're trying to shoot a bee that just, landed on a flower, you can't wait 10 seconds because it might fly away. So, a lot of times you just need to use a 2-second timer. But when you're that close to a subject, just pushing the shutter button down on your camera, even though it's on a tripod, is going to shake the camera enough for it to blur. So a lot of times you'll stick a remote shutter release in the side of your camera. You have a port there, a little plug that you can plug that in. You can get a shutter release for like, $15. And then set your camera up, and when you see that, hopefully you can press the shutter release, and then that won't shake the camera. Okay, but here's the cool part. Here's how you turn your regular lens into a macro lens. You have the 18 to 55 lens on your camera, and believe it or not, what you have to do is you have to take the lens off and flip it around backwards. So I'm going to use another lens here because this lens is not. I'm going to use this lens here. And this lens would, let's say, oops, sorry. Use this lens here. Okay. And let's just say that this lens that I have, by the way, this is a old Pentax film lens. And you can use old film lenses on your Canon camera. You don't get the autofocus mode. It's all manual focus. And the aperture, you have to, click. Here, you can see the aperture ring here. And that opens up the aperture and closes down the aperture. But these lenses are still good glass. And this is an old Pentax lens. And what I did was I got a little ring that you can attach to the back of this lens. This is like $5, $10. And then you can mount this old Pentax lens onto your camera. Just line up the red. And you can just click it. And now I can use an old film, film lens. These lenses you can get on eBay, very cheap, but they're wide aperture lenses, so you get real nice shallow depth of field. This one goes down to 1.7, the aperture on this lens. So if you want a great portrait lens and you're willing to manual focus instead of autofocus, if you have the time to do that, then, you could pick this up dirt cheap and, But anyway, let's say this is the 18 to 55 millimeter lens on your camera. What you end up doing is you end up taking the lens off, turning it backwards, and sticking it up against the opening here of your camera. You just stick it there. And then you look in the back of your viewfinder, and believe it or not, you will, as you get close to a subject, okay, you just start getting closer and closer and closer to the subject, you will start seeing the image, and then you'll start seeing it, start coming into focus. It's a really interesting thing. You need to, I would do this outdoors, because when you first put this on and you look through And put your camera on the live view mode, okay, so that when you're you know, when you usually turn your camera on, you have to look through the viewfinder to see the image, but go to live view so that when you press it, you're now seeing outside. You know, it's like a phone, right? You're seeing the image through your LCD screen here. And you put your lens up against here like that, okay? And you can see that I can actually start seeing, you know, you see my microphone right there? I could start seeing it. And as I get closer and closer to it, you know, I know this is a terrible way to show you, but anyway, you get the picture, okay? You can start seeing your subject through the back end of your lens. Now, you know, spend some time and look and do this, and you'll see that it actually works. You know, I can get up really close. Now, the only thing about this is that you only get one view. You can't zoom in or you can't zoom out. So when you put this on your camera like this and you start moving in close, okay, once it's in focus, that's the frame that you get. Okay, you can't zoom back out or get even closer. Okay, there's only one plane of focus, and you'll have to find that by just kind of keep moving in, and all of a sudden you'll see when it focuses. And when it does, that's the, and it's usually a pretty close-up view of that. So that's a really cool way to turn your lens, your regular lens, into a macro lens. And this works good for certain types of shots, not every shot. It's much better to use a dedicated macro lens, because then you have the ability to kind of zoom in or zoom out and reframe things the way you want. This one you can't really reframe it. Whatever framing you get, that's it. Now, if you want to go a step further with this lens, each lens has a filter thread. Okay, whenever you buy a lens and take the lens cap off, there is the diameter of your filter, you know, if you were to screw a filter on. And so what you do is you get a one of these rings here, and this ring is very cheap. You know, it's like, again, $5 for this ring. And on one side of this ring is the actual mount that mounts to the camera. And the other side of this is the filter thread that screws onto your lens. So if I took this and I screwed this onto my, if I screw this onto my lens here, I'm going to screw this on here. Okay, this is the front of my lens. This is the back of my lens. So I'm screwing this on the front of my lens. And then see the mount right here, the red dot? So now I'm going to take that red dot, line it up to the camera, and I could literally mount this lens now to my camera without having to hold the lens here. I mean, holding the lens is really hard. So now I could set this up on a tripod and just kind of go in and use this like a regular macro lens. Okay, so there is a ring that you can actually buy to use this in reverse, to use your lens in reverse. And if this filter thread fits your other lenses, then you can use this same ring for all your other lenses and mount all your other lenses back to mount all your other lenses up, you know, backwards to your camera. Which also leads me to another valuable thing, which is this little ring right here. This is what's called a step-up ring. And these rings that I'm showing you are all like fairly cheap. What this ring does is it allows you to use, you know, if you wanted to buy one of these, this is 72 millimeters, and this is 72 millimeters. You buy a step-up ring, which the inside thread is the thread size of your lens, and the outside thread is always 72. Since the outside thread is always 72, you can always use this ring on all of your lenses. So on this lens, I would use like a 67 to a 72. 67's on the inside, 72's on the outside. This is 67, so I screw this on, it works. I'll get another one of these step-up rings for this lens, and this is maybe, you know, let's say a 52. So 52 to 72. Screw this on, and I can still use this ring. So if you buy these step-up rings for every one of your lenses, and every time the outermost thread is 72, you can always use this on every single lens. Same with any filter, like neutral density filters. If you buy one neutral density filter, and you can use it on all of your lenses if you buy these little cheap step-up rings. Okay, but anyway, the point here of this is how to use your lens as a macro lens, and you do it by taking it off and using it the opposite way. Okay, and you can just hold it there and look through your viewfinder, and you'll see the image. Okay, so that's a little bit about how to shoot a macro shot. The takeaways of that are, number one, you want to be very steady. You want to have a deep depth of field, and you know, use a tripod if possible. But if you are hand holding, then you might want to put your camera on a burst mode, high-speed burst mode, and then just burst off a lot of shots, and then hope that one is in focus. And then you get it into Lightroom, and you can do exactly the same type of processing. Same thing that we've been doing up until now. But also look into cheap film lenses. Pentax makes them, Nikon makes them, and you can grab these rings, these converters. So in this Pentax lens, I bought a Pentax to Canon mount, and it mounts to Canon, or a Nikon to Canon mount. And you can fit these on, and it works. Okay, and you can get some nice close-up shots. Okay, the next thing is long exposure shots. And let me again jump to my share screen here. Long exposure shots are some of my favorite shots of all time. I love shooting night shots. And every time I shoot at night, it requires a long exposure. Another thing you can do with long exposure shots is you can get effects like this, where you're blurring out water, like that. Waterfalls, you know, just really great effects. One of my favorite was at Victoria Beach, where, or here's one at Laguna, where you get this kind of effect, you know, where it just looks like the water is just completely blurred because it's moving, and then the things that aren't moving are in complete focus. Waterfalls, water, night shots, you know, all kind of things. This is more of a fast shutter speed, where you're freezing the water in the air so you can see every little speck of water droplets, you know. So you'd want a fast shutter speed if you wanted to take a shot like that. Let me just go to that one shot that I've always liked. Yeah, we talked about, you know, night shots like this LA shot here, you know, where you want to blur out the traffic and things like that. This shot here is one of my favorite shots too, in Mammoth, where this was at Rush Creek, and I shot a long exposure here, and this water turned into like a mirror. I mean, it was really moving and it was rippling and all of that. But when you shoot a long exposure, then it blurs everything out, and you get that really nice effect. Now you need a filter for this because you need to cover your lens with a dark filter so that you get a long shutter speed. Long shutter speed is what you're trying to achieve. Anything like over, 5 seconds will do this. Actually, it doesn't even have to be 5 seconds. Even sometimes even 1 second will get you an effect like that. 1 second is long enough to blur water. And I like shooting long exposures when I'm shooting water, whether it's lakes or the ocean, because it just gives that very dramatic feel. There's one thing about shooting water moving, that's one thing, and then that might be an effect that you want. But there's quite another thing when you're purposely trying to blur the water, and that gives you an entirely different effect. Here's one in San Diego that I shot at night. Okay, these are all fast exposure shots here, so you can see the water, but this one here at night was one that I shot, and look at the water. It almost looks like silk. And that's because this exposure was probably, up to over a minute. And again, you can leave the shutter open that long and still get extreme sharp images that aren't moving. So if anything's moving, then it blurs. If everything is steady, and this was on a tripod, obviously. So a long exposure, and that's definitely an effect. Here's another long exposure shot, and you get this really kind of swirliness of the water and, milky kind of stuff, especially when water is, spilling over rocks and stuff. That's what you kind of still want to find that one shot at Victoria Gardens here. That was one of my favorite shots here. Let me just look for it here. It's up in this. Should have all this queued up here, but oh, here it was this day here. Yeah, so it was this shot here. There was this really cool rock at Victoria Beach and off of Laguna. And I set my tripod up, and this is the actual shot. My friend was with me, so he shot me taking that shot. And this is our other dog. And I have my tripod set up here on the rocks, and I'm just pointing it at that scene. And here's another scene that was nice. The sun was hitting this, and this was, again, a long exposure. I had to put a filter on the lens to slow down the shutter. Okay, so this is more of a faster exposure shot. So I wanted to just mention how these shots were taken and what you need to do. So the idea here is to slow down your shutter, and anytime you do that, you definitely need to be on a tripod. These things could never be taken without having your camera steady. And a good tripod is definitely a good investment to have if you like landscape, long exposure shots. Another thing that you'll need is, now your lens is perfect for these types of shots. You can certainly take this shot with your lens. It would have taken this shot exactly the same as this. I processed this in Lightroom, so there were some things that I did, but outside of that, the lens does not have to be some expensive telephoto lens or anything. Wide angle 18 or anything between 18 and 55, depending on how you want to frame it, is up to you as far as the choice. But what you want to do is have a very slow shutter speed, and that's what you have to kind of experiment with. Now, I've learned through shooting things like this, that too slow of a shutter speed gets you too kind of blurry a shot, even too blurry, where the water starts getting really kind of foggy, and that's not necessarily what you want. So you don't want a real long shutter speed, like minutes long. What you want is something somewhere in between, I would say like a minute and 3 seconds or something, somewhere in anything in there. And it really is a matter of experimenting. But the way you do it is you set up your camera, number one, with a deep depth of field. You want deep depth of field, so small aperture, f11, f16, something like that. Get your camera on a tripod, focus the shot, spend time in framing it the way you want it framed. The nice thing about landscape photography is that you have the time to really work the shot. You're out there, and you're framing, and there's no real rush to take the shot. Like when you shoot people, you got to kind of do that quickly because people don't like to be posing in front of a camera for too long. So you frame the shot, you set up your camera f16, ISO as low as you can go. Okay, ISO 100, which is the lowest on your camera. What you're trying to do is get that long shutter speed. So at f16, ISO 100, you're going to frame the shot, press your shutter halfway, and take a look at what your shutter speed is. Now, I shot this at sunset, and sunset you usually get a fairly slower shutter speed, obviously, than bright sun in the middle of the day. However, it's still too fast. Okay, your shutter speed is still going to be too fast. So at ISO 100 f16, my shutter speed might be like a 30th of a second. Now at a 30th of a second, this is not going to blur like this. You need to go at least a second or two. So how do you do that? How do you get your camera to get that slow? What you do is you have to buy a filter. And you buy what's called a neutral density filter, an ND filter. And all you have to do is Google that, and Google it for the filter thread size of your lens. And, good ones are not cheap, but they're worth it if you're going to, try and shoot a shot like this. And I would get a neutral density filter of about 6 stops, meaning that it cuts the light about 6 full stops of light. So if you're getting 1/30 and you put a 6-stop neutral density filter on, that ought to do the trick. That'll slow your shutter speed down. It's kind of like putting sunglasses on your eyes. Okay? It just makes it darker. And the darker your lens is, the less light comes through, the longer it takes to expose the shot. And that's exactly what you want. So having a 6-stop neutral density filter in your bag is a great way to get shots like this. You screw that on, you put it on, and suddenly you'll look at your shutter speed. Instead of 1/30, you're now getting maybe 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds. And as the sun goes down, okay, and the sun goes down really fast. If you watch sunset, the sun will go down really quick. I mean, within minutes. And as that sun goes down, your shutter speeds get longer and longer and longer. Now, after, a minute, you're still okay because you're on a tripod. And then what you want to do is start timing the shot. You want to put your camera on a timer, like a 2-second timer, and then you want to watch the waves come in and splash and hit the water. And as soon as the waves hit the water, you click your shutter, and it goes 1001, 1002, and then the shutter opens up. Now when the shutter opens up, the water is starting to drain off the rock. You don't want to shoot when the water is coming in, because all you're going to do is get a big blob of white here. What you want to do is time it where the water hits the rock, and then as it's draining off, your shutter opens. And that's when you're going to get this kind of effect. And it's really cool. I mean, it's just, you know, and it takes several attempts to do this. You might have to do it, you know, at least five or 10 times. But you got to time the water. So that's another thing that's part of it. But once you do, you're going to get some just amazing, you know, seascape shots or lake shots. With a lake, you know, it's not that critical because you don't really have to time stuff. But at the ocean, yeah, you have to be careful about that. But that's what you're doing. And you're setting up for a long exposure. It takes a neutral density filter. That's all you have to buy. 6-stop neutral density filter. Screw it on your lens and stick your camera on a tripod. And you can achieve shots like that. Take it into Lightroom and, you know, do whatever it takes to, you know, to spice it up a little bit. This was our latest, my latest night shot. And I forgot my neutral density filter when I went to Monterey this past few weeks ago, but I wanted to take this shot here, and I really wanted the water to be just kind of blurry. And so I set this up. I shot it late at night, and I used a long shutter speed, and then I realized that I was getting blurry boats and blurry, you know, blurry pier. Couldn't figure out why because I was on a tripod, but I realized that, you know, this stuff moves. I mean, it's in the water, right? The boats are moving. And so the longer the exposure, the more blurry those boats get. So I realized that in this case, I really couldn't have a long exposure because, you know, the boats were moving. So I had to speed up the shutter. But if nothing is moving, then you can certainly get that. You can definitely get, you know, that kind of effect. So that is, yeah, going back to this one here. Going back to this shot right here. This is an absolute focus. I used a 10-stop neutral density filter on this lens. I had to really slow the shutter speed down because it was bright sunlight. This was in kind of like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and there was too much light for me to get a slow shutter speed. So I had to really, a 10-stop neutral density filter is almost like black. It's almost like solid black. And it really slows down the amount of light. And it allowed me to get a long enough shutter speed where, you know, this happened. But you can see just the grains of the rock. It's just an absolute sharp focus. So you're combining that blurriness with sharpness. And that's a really cool shot to get. So whether it's in the daytime or whether it's at night, you know, all depends on what effect you're going for. But that's another shot that I wanted to talk about. So a macro shot, a long exposure shot, which could be day or night, shooting people with shallow depth of field, and then shooting landscapes with, you know, HDR. And the thing about long exposure, though, is that you don't do HDR with long exposure. Long exposure is just one single shot. So that's what you use. Now I want to go back real quick to the questions that you, the discussion questions that you posted. And the last ones that you posted are ones that I wanted to just verbally respond to. So I'm just going to go to that. Let me get that up here so I can see it here. And I gave you guys all 30 points for that, for this discussion. But Lauren, I think, no, I think Ruben, I actually wrote because your response for that. But Lauren, you asked a question, when shooting an HDR photo, does it take up more storage space than a photo with regular settings? And the answer is yes, it does. HDR is, well, the actual capture is no more than any single capture. But the only reason it takes up more space is because you're shooting 3 shots. Okay. But if you're asking, is a single shot anymore, HDR isn't the shot itself, it's the process of how you're shooting it. So you're shooting 3 individual raw shots, whereas a regular shot would just be 1 raw shot. So yeah, that's that's all that is. But yeah, just know that 3 HDR shots are going to be 3 raw shots, which, you know, is going to be a lot of file size in an HDR shot. Okay, the other question, Ruben, you asked, I answered, and I tried to answer as completely as I could in terms of would you use HDR if you were shooting a product shot? And my answer was simply, the only reason why you're using HDR as a technique is when you have high dynamic range, when your subject has extreme highlights and extreme shadows that your camera can't capture in one shot. And so that's something that you're going to have to kind of analyze based on what you're seeing. You know, is there a lot of contrast in this? Is there a lot of dynamic range? Even if it's a product shot, if there is, then yeah, shoot in HDR, as long as nothing's moving in the shot. But if it's an overcast day where there's not a whole lot of difference between shadows and highlights, then one raw shot should do it. So I end up taking way too many HDR shots. And the problem with that is that when I get home to edit, it's like, you know, wow, there's a lot of editing because I have to do HDR for every single shot that I process. And, you know, I kind of don't want to do that if I don't have to. Okay, the other question was, let's see, this is Chris. You asked, is shooting HDR with a flash at night a headache? Does it work? You don't really need to shoot HDR with a flash because basically, if you're needing a flash, you don't have high dynamic range. You don't have a lot of highlights and shadows going. All you're doing with flash is trying to light up a scene, you know. So, yeah, you really don't use HDR with flash. And then, Brian, you asked, is there any preset setting we can have on a camera for shooting HDR shots, or will it always have to be done manually? Now, that's actually something that is a capability of your camera body. And if your camera body has a, I'm going to bring this up here, in your mode dial right here, some of the semi-pro and pro cameras, in fact, all of the pro cameras have what's called the C1, C2, and C3 settings. This is a semi-pro camera, which only has a C1 setting. I don't know if you can see that, but it just says C right there. And C stands for a preset setting. In other words, all C is a preset. So you put your camera mode to C, you set up your camera for HDR, okay, you know, 3 shots, burst mode, ISO, aperture, all of those settings. And then you press set and it records it to that preset. So now when you're shooting other things and you want to quickly go to an HDR mode, you just go to C and everything's all set up. It's a preset. So it's really nice. With consumer cameras like maybe yours, I don't know if you have that C mode on your, do you guys have that on your camera at all? Okay, so in that case, if you don't, then yes, you'd have to manually set it up every time you wanted an HDR shot. And that kind of becomes a hassle because it takes time to go into your menus and make, you know, exposure compensation, you know, 3 shots and ISO and all of that. It's really nice to have presets, and that's part of what a pro camera will give you. You know, 5D Mark III that we have 3 presets. So I could have a preset for portraits. I could have a preset for, you know, what I usually used to do is use presets for indoor shots and outdoor shots. So if I went outside real quick, I just set a preset for the outside. If I went indoors, I'd set indoor preset, which would change the white balance and all of those settings. It'll change like a myriad of settings in one click. So yeah. Okay, and then let's see, was that it? That was all of the questions for that. Not sure if I addressed the other discussion questions on that. Let me just go here for a sec real quick. Yeah, these are the ones that I think I had answered from before. Okay. All right. So, like I said, what I'll do is I'll make a video for your future reference. I mean, there's not going to be any kind of assignment based on this video on video, how to shoot video with your camera, but maybe something that you could reference in the future as far as whenever you want to use your camera for video, what settings to set it up on. And, again, we really need a dedicated class in this program for how to shoot video using a DSLR. I mean, I could have spent the entire class module on just this subject alone. But if you have any questions about it, you're always free to hit me up, email me, or message me about any questions that you have about photography or video. But there's tons and tons of, tutorials on your camera, on how to shoot video with your camera on YouTube that, if you ever get in the position to have to do that with your camera, there's lots of resources for you to learn how to do that. Your cameras shoot great video too. And, most of us use our phones these days to shoot video, but it's nothing compared to a DSLR in terms of the quality of the video. And then, we did do Final Cut Pro and video editing, so you can see what the possibilities of that are. But that is really some big stuff to know these days. And what companies are really looking for in graphic designers is that ability to, shoot videos. What's another thing that's is podcasting. It's huge, and companies are starting to, do that. So that's another skill to have, to be able to set up audio, to be able to do a podcast. But anyway, I will do that. And then as far as Wednesday is our last day, which is, of all things, the day before Christmas Eve. And then there's the break, the Christmas break. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm not too keen on having a Zoom meeting on Wednesday. That's cool with you. We can just end this thing now, and if you'll submit your final, Chris, if you'll submit the final art direction and team projects pieces, we'll close out this this module, or these two modules, and you guys can have a good Christmas break. How's that sound?
So
Anybody?
should we submit by Wednesday?
By Wednesday, yeah. I have to submit grades. Actually, let me just say, if you could do that at least by Wednesday morning, because I've got to submit grades on Wednesday. Otherwise, I get fired. I'm serious, man.
Okay.
That's how serious they are about these grades this semester. So please, if you'll do that. And as far as photography is concerned, there's really no other assignments that I'm going to give you for that, because it ends on Wednesday anyway. So, but I really encourage you guys to make use out of your cameras. I know more and more now, people are using these type of cameras less and less because phone cameras are getting so good, and it's convenience, right? You have it in your pocket, and when was the last time you grabbed your camera and you took it out and went somewhere, with the intent to shoot photography? I mean, I say do so. Do that. If you like photography, get your camera and start learning how to use it and shoot. And try shooting some of this stuff because it'll pay off as a graphic designer. It'll definitely pay off in the job. But you have a great camera here and a great lens. And for me, photography is I love photography, and I do that on my spare time. So, but yeah, there's just a lot of stuff to learn, and I try to teach this basically by the how you're going to use it, by the shot, show you how to shoot. I mean, if I only have so much time to in a module, I'd rather teach how to get a particular shot than to teach you, the fundamentals of photography and the theory and all of that. I mean, that's important though. It really is. We just didn't have enough time to really cover that.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody doing anything fun? Or everyone hunkering down for Christmas?
Staying home.
Yeah.
Staying home, huh? Yeah, I know. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Not doing anything. Trying to stay away from people more than anything else.
Hey Chris, I actually
Yeah.
have I got a few more of those things done after the class. I'll send
The changes.
a couple photos, and I think I got my personal favorite, but I'll let you decide.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, just send those.
Got you.
John, I have a question.
Yes.
The next classes, they start on the 4th, right? That's like the day that everybody gets back and the classes start again.
Yes, that's what the schedule looks like. Yeah.
Okay, I was just double checking.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, usually Plaid is off between Christmas and New Year's, and depending on what day New Year's falls on, sometimes we go back on the 3rd, sometimes we go back on the 5th, depending when it is. So yeah, I think the 4th is when they start up again, and again everything's online until they let us know. Looks like that might be the situation for a while. I mean, plan on it. I mean, I don't plan on going back to campus, any one of the campuses I teach at, probably till summer, the way things have been going. So, everyone
Oh,
safe and healthy, and your families and stuff?
so far, yeah.
Yeah.
3 of my family
Mm-hmm.
members got COVID.
3 in your family? Oh, really? Your
Yeah,
immediate family?
yeah, 4. My 2 of my uncles, 1 of my cousins, and then my aunt. Like
Uh-huh.
my aunt, my uncle, and my cousin are all in the same household,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
my other uncle's in a different household. But they all have it, but they're not like dying or anything. They
Yeah.
just have
Yeah.
minor symptoms.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, it sounds pretty good as far as, the recovery rate is going. So, that's a good sign,
Yeah,
especially when you're
it's a lot better than what the media makes it seem like, but that's
Yeah,
as
yeah.
long as you take care of yourself and not just like go out carelessly and spread it to everybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
everything will be fine.
Yeah. Well, I have a very good friend of mine's mom who's like 92 right now, got it, and she was in the hospital. She got pneumonia, all of that. But she's okay. She came out all right. You
Oh,
know,
wow.
yeah. When it hits home like that, it's different, People look at
Yeah.
it a little bit different, take it a little more seriously, I guess. But yeah, I just can't believe this whole year, man. Unbelievable. And it's not over, man.
I'm trying not to get it. There's like 6 people at my job that got it, and they're in a different
Oh,
building than I
wow.
am, but my wife works in that building that they got it in.
Oh
So
boy.
Oh,
like
Yeah.
geez.
they do the temperature checks and everything, but even
Yeah.
one of the ladies I work with, her husband just got it, so she hasn't been at work. So it's
Uh-huh.
been it's been all around me. So I'm
Oh,
really
man.
hoping I don't get it. And even if I do, I mean, take care of it then, but still it's kind of scary just because it's so close.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. Well, you guys all be safe, all right? And have as good a holiday as you can.
I
And
will.
You too.
I will see.
I'll have the
I
same.
will.
Say hi to Carly for us.
Yes, yes, I will.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
we're just she's in that room, I'm in this room, and you know we're doing classes at the same time, so it's just all different for us
Funny.
too. And thanks for all this time for uh, hanging in there with me. I mean, I know that these videos are like I don't even know. I try and look at them sometimes, but it's like, oh man, who's gonna watch this? But I do it anyway, so because at least it's everything's archived. So,
Yeah.
but okay, you guys take care.
All
I
right.
will see you next year.
All
See ya.
right.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Merry Christmas.